I got a call about someone who didn't look like they belonged here. I need to see some ID.
I live here. I'm literally washing my car in my own driveway.
Just cooperate and we'll be done here.
You really gonna do this?
Sir, don't make this harder than it needs to be.
I'm Sergeant Darnell Whitmore. I'm sure you recognize my name. Now I need your badge number because you're in big trouble.
The quiet that came next lasted only 4 seconds. Yet in those 4 seconds, Officer Trevor Castellano felt his whole reality fall apart. The man he had just ordered to cooperate, the person he had judged as someone who looked out of place, was not an ordinary resident. He was a 15-year veteran of the police force. He was a respected sergeant. And just 3 weeks earlier, he had become Castellano's direct supervisor in the East Division Patrol Unit. This was not a simple call that Castellano could document and move past. This was a moment that could end a career and be used as a lesson in police training for years. And Castellano's own body camera was capturing every word spoken. Trevor Castellano had served on the force for 4 years. He was 28 years old, married, and believed he was a solid officer. He grew up in a mostly white suburban area around 30 miles from the city where he now worked. His father had also been a police officer, and Castellano had long dreamed of following the same path. He completed the police academy, finished near the middle of his class, and was assigned to the East Division. His file listed 14 commendations for good service. He had made multiple strong arrests, helped with community programs, and his supervisors consistently rated him as reliable. But there was another pattern in Castellano's record that never truly got addressed. During his 4 years, he had received 9 citizen complaints claiming racial profiling or improper behavior. Every one of those complaints came from Black or Latino residents. All 9 were investigated and marked as unfounded or lacking evidence. Those investigations were handled by his former supervisor, Lieutenant Vernon Kowalski, who was known for defending his officers and brushing off most civilian complaints as attempts to avoid lawful police action. Kowalski had retired 6 months earlier. The new supervisor of Castellano's unit came from another division, someone he had never worked under before. That person was Darnell Whitmore. Darnell Whitmore was 38 years old and had spent 15 years with the department. He began as a patrol officer, advanced to detective, and later moved into a supervisory role. His record was outstanding, including 2 medals of valor for bravery under fire, numerous successful cases, and a reputation for being firm but fair. For the past 5 years, he had lived in the Riverside neighborhood, one of the city's more desirable areas. His home was a well-kept 3-bedroom craftsman-style house with a detached garage and a small front lawn. The neighborhood was mostly white, upper-middle class, and peaceful. Whitmore lived there with his wife and 2 daughters. He loved the area. Good schools, low crime, friendly neighbors. When he moved in, he introduced himself to everyone on the block. Most were welcoming. A few looked surprised that a Black family was moving in, but Whitmore had seen that before. He focused on being a good neighbor and ignored the rest. That Saturday morning in November, Whitmore was off duty. He decided to wash his car, a dark blue sedan that was dirty after a week of rain. He pulled into the driveway, took out a bucket and sponge, and got to work. The weather was ideal, mid-60s, sunny with a light breeze. Whitmore wore jeans, a gray t-shirt, and worn sneakers. He had earbuds in, listening to music as he worked. He felt calm, enjoying his day off, thinking about taking his daughters to the park later. He never heard the patrol car stop behind him. Castellano had been driving through the Riverside area on routine patrol when his radio crackled. Dispatch reported a suspicious person on the 2400 block of Maple Street. The caller, who stayed anonymous, claimed there was a Black male acting strangely around vehicles. Castellano replied that he would handle it. He drove to Maple Street and began looking for someone matching the report. That's when he noticed Whitmore washing a car in a driveway. Castellano made several quick assumptions. First, he decided Whitmore didn't live there. The homes were too nice, too expensive. Second, he assumed Whitmore might be checking cars to steal from them. Third, he concluded this had to be the suspicious person the caller mentioned. Castellano never stopped to consider that Whitmore might actually own the house. He never thought that washing a car in your own driveway on a Saturday morning is not suspicious at all. He never contacted dispatch to ask for clarification. Instead, he stepped out of his patrol car and walked up with his hand resting on his service weapon. Before we go further, where are you watching from? Drop your country or state in the comments. And if you value stories that reveal the reality of racial profiling, even inside law enforcement, hit the subscribe button now. What happens next may surprise you. Whitmore didn't notice Castellano until the officer was about 10 feet away. He removed one earbud and turned around. That's when he saw a uniformed officer approaching with a stern look and a hand near his weapon. Whitmore's first thought was that something had gone wrong nearby. Maybe a burglary, maybe an accident. He shut off the hose and walked toward Castellano, expecting a professional exchange between two officers, even though Castellano didn't yet know who he was. But Castellano's opening words were not professional. They were an accusation disguised as an order. He said they received a call about someone who didn't look like they belonged there and demanded to see ID. Whitmore felt the words hit hard. Someone who didn't look like they belonged. Not someone committing a crime, not someone matching a suspect description, just someone who didn't seem to belong in this neighborhood. Whitmore stayed calm and stated the obvious. He lived there. He was washing his own car in his own driveway. It was a clear fact that should have ended the encounter on the spot. But Castellano didn't apologize, didn't back off, didn't rethink his approach. He simply told Whitmore to cooperate, and this would be over. As if Whitmore was the problem. As if existing as a black man in a white neighborhood required police approval. Whitmore asked the question hanging between them. "You're really going to do this?" It wasn't only about the ID. It was about whether Castellano truly planned to carry out obvious racial profiling, whether he would stop someone based on race alone. Castellano's reply made it clear. He told Whitmore not to make it more difficult than necessary. The message was obvious: comply, don't ask questions, don't assert your rights. Just do what you're told. That's when Whitmore made his choice. He identified himself, gave his name and rank, and said he assumed Castellano recognized it. Judging by Castellano's expression, he clearly didn't. Whitmore then asked for Castellano's badge number and told him he was in serious trouble. The body camera showed it clearly. Castellano's face shifted from confidence to pure shock. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His hand dropped away from his weapon. He took a small step backward. Whitmore let the silence sit for a moment. Then he spoke, calm but firm. He asked again for the badge number. Castellano rattled, muttered 2847. Whitmore then asked Castellano to explain what reasonable suspicion justified stopping someone washing a car in their own driveway. What part of the call made this stop valid? Castellano tried to regain control. He said he received a call about someone acting suspicious. Whitmore asked what the caller actually reported. Castellano repeated that the person didn't look like they belonged. Whitmore pushed further. What behavior was suspicious? What crime was reported? Castellano had no answer that didn't point to racial profiling. There was no crime reported. He saw no suspicious actions. He had only heard that someone didn't look like they belonged and saw a black man washing a car. Whitmore asked if Castellano confirmed the address from the complaint. He hadn't. Whitmore asked if Castellano requested more details from dispatch. He hadn't. Whitmore asked whether Castellano had seen any real criminal activity before walking up to him. Castellano said he had not. Whitmore then asked the question that would later sit at the heart of the investigation. He asked whether the only reason for the stop was that Whitmore was a black man standing in a mostly white neighborhood, and whether didn't look like they belonged was simply code for that. Castellano tried to reject the idea. He said race had nothing to do with it. He was just answering a call. Someone had reported a suspicious person. Whitmore pressed again. What exactly was suspicious? Castellano repeated what the caller had said, that someone didn't look like they belonged. Castellano could not explain how that amounted to reasonable suspicion without admitting it came down to race. He tried to change direction. He told Whitmore to just cooperate so the situation could end. Whitmore's reply was calm but sharp. He pointed out that just cooperate is not a legal reason to detain someone. Police need reasonable suspicion. Castellano still couldn't provide any. The exchange continued for another 6 minutes. Whitmore carefully walked Castellano through each mistake he had made, every assumption, every policy violation, and every constitutional problem. He explained that not looking like you belong is not reasonable suspicion of a crime. He explained that being black in a white neighborhood is not reasonable suspicion of a crime. He explained that anonymous calls with no specific report of criminal behavior do not justify a stop without independent confirmation. Quick question for you watching. If you've ever been profiled by police while doing nothing wrong, type "it happens" in the comments. Let's show how often this really occurs. Castellano attempted several ways to downplay his actions. He said he was simply following up on a call and doing his job. Whitmore responded that doing your job means investigating properly, not relying on racial assumptions. Castellano said the caller sounded concerned. Whitmore asked what specific concern was mentioned. Castellano couldn't name one beyond someone not belonging. Castellano then said Whitmore should understand, officer to officer, that quick decisions are sometimes necessary. Whitmore replied that quick decisions based only on race are still racial profiling and still a violation of the Constitution, no matter who you are. By the end of the interaction, Castellano knew the situation was serious. Whitmore told him to return to the station immediately and report to the watch commander. He said he would be filing a formal complaint and triggering an internal investigation. Castellano's body camera had recorded everything, and Whitmore had also saved the encounter on his personal phone. Castellano drove back to the station in a daze. He had just challenged his own sergeant. He had engaged in clear racial profiling, and every second of it was documented. There was no explanation that could fix this. When Castellano reached the station, the watch commander was already waiting. The news had spread quickly. Whitmore had called ahead. Castellano was placed on administrative leave right away. His badge and firearm were collected. He was sent home and told not to discuss the incident with anyone. The investigation began that same day. Internal Affairs assigned 2 senior investigators, and the first thing they reviewed was Castellano's body camera footage. The footage was devastating. You could hear Castellano clearly say, "We got a call about someone who didn't look like they belonged here." You could hear Whitmore calmly explain that he lived there and was washing his car in his own driveway. You could hear Castellano telling him to just cooperate without any legal reason. The audio captured Whitmore's controlled frustration when he asked, "You're really going to do this?" And it captured the moment everything shifted when Whitmore identified himself as Sergeant Darnell Whitmore and told Castellano he was in serious trouble. Investigators then pulled Castellano's personnel file and found the 9 prior complaints. Now there was context. This was not a one-time mistake. It was a pattern that had been overlooked. They interviewed Whitmore in depth. He gave a detailed statement. He explained that he had been profiled before as a civilian, but being profiled by one of his own officers while off-duty was deeply disturbing. He said it raised major concerns about Castellano's judgment and whether he had been engaging in racial profiling throughout his career. Investigators interviewed Castellano 3 days later. Castellano attempted to justify his actions. He said he was responding to a valid call. When investigators pointed out that the call gave no specific address and no description beyond race, Castellano said he had to make a judgment call. They asked why he assumed Whitmore was the person from the call when Whitmore was clearly washing a car in a residential driveway. Castellano said the caller reported someone who didn't look like they belonged. When asked what that actually meant, Castellano couldn't explain it without circling back to race. Investigators asked what he meant when he told Whitmore to just cooperate. Castellano said he was trying to calm the situation. Investigators responded that demanding identification without legal cause is not de-escalation. It escalates the situation and violates rights. They asked Castellano whether he knew Whitmore was a sergeant when he approached him. Castellano said no. They then asked if knowing that would have changed his behavior. Castellano said probably. That answer said everything. It meant Castellano would have treated a white homeowner differently than he treated Whitmore. It showed his actions were based on assumptions about who belonged in the neighborhood, not on actual suspicious conduct. Investigators reviewed the original dispatch call. The anonymous caller had only reported a black male on Maple Street who didn't look like he belonged and was acting suspiciously around cars. No address was given. No crime was described. No details were provided beyond race, a general area, and the loaded phrase, "didn't look like he belonged." In other words, it was a textbook example of a racially biased call that officers are trained to treat with caution, not act on immediately. Calls like this, using vague language and racial descriptions without criminal behavior, often come from people who view any person of color in their neighborhood as a threat. Castellano should have requested more information, observed the situation, and looked for actual criminal activity. Instead, he saw a black man and decided that was enough. Investigators uncovered another troubling detail. They reviewed dispatch data from Castellano's entire 4-year career and noticed a pattern. He responded to suspicious person calls 40% more often than other officers in his district. and 87% of those calls involved people of color. Either Castellano worked in an area with unusually high suspicious activity among people of color, or he was actively choosing calls that allowed him to stop them. The data strongly pointed to the second explanation. Do you think the department should have noticed this pattern sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments. The investigation lasted 7 weeks. During that time, investigators conducted 23 interviews, reviewed 14 hours of body camera footage from Castellano's prior stops, and analyzed 4 years of dispatch records and reports. Their conclusions were clear. Castellano had violated department policy on racial profiling. He had conducted a stop without reasonable suspicion. He had failed to investigate before engaging a citizen. He had relied on race instead of behavior. But the investigation revealed more than a single incident. Investigators contacted the 9 people who had previously filed complaints against Castellano. 8 agreed to speak. Their accounts were strikingly similar. A 45-year-old black attorney named Jerome Buckley described being stopped by Castellano while jogging in a park near his home. Castellano demanded ID and questioned why Buckley was in the area. Buckley explained that he lived nearby and ran there several times a week. Castellano made him stand there while he ran Buckley's ID to check for warrants. There were none. Castellano let him go with no explanation and no apology. A 32-year-old Latina business owner named Elena Fuentes described being stopped by Castellano while loading equipment into her van outside her own shop. Castellano accused her of stealing and demanded receipts for the equipment. Fuentes owned the business, and the equipment belonged to her. She showed Castellano her business license. Castellano said he was just being thorough. Fuentes filed a complaint. It was labeled unfounded. A 19-year-old black college student named Tyrell Washington explained that Castellano stopped him while he was walking home from class at 8 o'clock p.m. Castellano asked where he was going, where he had been, and why he was in that neighborhood. Washington said he was a student who lived 3 blocks away. Castellano made him empty his backpack on the sidewalk. Washington filed a complaint. Lieutenant Kowalski investigated it and dismissed it as a lawful investigative stop. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Castellano repeatedly stopped people of color in situations that did not justify police action. He repeatedly demanded identification without legal cause. He repeatedly assumed people of color were out of place in certain neighborhoods. More importantly, the investigation concluded that Castellano's 9 earlier complaints should have been handled far more seriously. A review of those cases showed that all 9 described nearly identical behavior. Castellano, assuming people of color did not belong in certain areas. Castellano demanding ID without legal justification. Castellano escalating situations that did not call for aggression. The investigation also revealed that Lieutenant Kowalski had been deliberately vague in how he handled complaints against Castellano. Kowalski's reports used phrases like "officer was conducting legitimate police work" and "complainant misunderstood standard procedures," without actually analyzing whether the stops met constitutional standards. In 3 cases, Kowalski never even interviewed Castellano before closing the complaints as unfounded. He simply read Castellano's incident reports and accepted them as fact. In 2 other cases, Kowalski interviewed Castellano, but failed to ask any serious questions about why the stops occurred or whether racial bias played a role. The previous supervisor either failed to see the pattern or saw it and chose to ignore it. Investigators noted in their report that Kowalski's lack of proper supervision allowed a problematic officer to violate citizens' rights for years. The recommendation was termination. Castellano's union fought the decision, arguing that he was responding to a legitimate call and that his actions, while overly aggressive, did not justify being fired. The department's response was direct. Castellano had racially profiled his own sergeant. If he was willing to do that to a superior officer, what was he doing to ordinary citizens with no power to push back? The union's argument failed. Castellano was fired 9 weeks after the incident. His appeal was denied. His law enforcement career ended at age 28, but the fallout went beyond Castellano alone. The department launched a full review of how civilian complaints were handled. They found that under Lieutenant Kowalski, investigations were superficial at best. The review examined 127 complaints Kowalski had handled during his final 5 years as a supervisor. Of those, 94 involved allegations of discrimination or excessive force. Kowalski found merit in only 3. The rest were dismissed as unfounded, unsubstantiated, or withdrawn. When Internal Affairs re-examined 30 of those cases using body camera footage and dispatch records Kowalski had never reviewed, they identified troubling patterns in 18 cases. Officers making stops without reasonable suspicion. Officers using force when it wasn't necessary. Officers making racially coded remarks. Kowalski's failure to investigate properly hadn't just shielded Castellano. It had protected several other officers whose behavior required correction. The department released a harsh report criticizing Kowalski's leadership and stating that his failure to properly investigate complaints had allowed misconduct to continue across his division. Kowalski had retired 6 months before the Whitmore incident, so formal discipline was no longer possible. However, the department stripped him of any retirement ceremony honors and made it clear that his legacy would be one of failed leadership. Several community leaders demanded that Kowalski return his pension, though that was not legally possible. The department also introduced sweeping new policies based on the findings. All complaints involving racial profiling would now be handled by Internal Affairs rather than division supervisors, removing the conflict of interest that allowed Kowalski to protect officers. All police stops would be reviewed quarterly to identify patterns of racial disparity. The department hired a data analyst whose only responsibility was tracking stop data to identify officers whose stops showed unexplained racial patterns. All body camera footage from investigative stops would be randomly audited to ensure policy compliance. 5% of all stops each month would be pulled at random and reviewed by a panel of supervisors and community members. The department also created a civilian review board with real authority. Previous oversight had been advisory only. The new board could subpoena testimony, access all records, and issue binding disciplinary recommendations. Officers were now required to complete 16 hours of implicit bias training each year, replacing the old 2-hour online course that many officers clicked through without engagement. The new training was in-person, interactive, and included scenarios designed to force officers to confront their own biases. The department also implemented an early warning system to flag officers showing troubling patterns before they resulted in sustained complaints. If an officer received 3 complaints alleging similar behavior within 1 year, even if none were sustained, they would be flagged for extra supervision and training. Whitmore played a key role in developing the new implicit bias training. He shared his own experience, using the body camera footage as a teaching tool. Officers watched a respected sergeant be profiled by one of their own. It was uncomfortable and powerful, exactly as intended. The training didn't stop with Whitmore's incident. It included footage from several of Castellano's earlier stops. Officers watched Castellano stop the attorney while jogging. They saw him challenge the business owner outside her own store. They watched him force a college student to empty his backpack. Trainers then asked what reasonable suspicion justified each stop. The answer was always the same. None. The only shared factor was the race of the person being stopped. Whitmore also became a strong advocate for officers of color. He learned he was not alone. Several black officers shared stories of being stopped by fellow officers while off duty, questioned about why they were in certain neighborhoods, and treated as suspects rather than colleagues. Whitmore started a mentoring program pairing experienced officers of color with new recruits. He worked with command staff to address bias and discrimination within the department. He pushed for more diversity in hiring and promotions. The incident exposed deep problems even within an institution sworn to serve and protect, and Whitmore was determined to change that culture. Castellano's firing drew major media attention. Local news covered the story of an officer fired for profiling his own sergeant. The story spread rapidly online. When the body camera footage was released after the investigation, it was viewed millions of times. Comment sections filled with people sharing similar experiences. Black professionals stopped in their own neighborhoods. Latino business owners questioned inside their own stores. Asian Americans followed by security in upscale shops. The story resonated because it showed profiling doesn't spare anyone, regardless of education, job, or status. Even a decorated police sergeant could be treated as suspicious simply for being black in a white neighborhood. Castellano gave one interview after his termination. He said he believed he was treated unfairly and insisted he had only been responding to a call and doing his job. When asked whether he understood why Whitmore was offended, Castellano gave a hesitant response that showed he still didn't fully understand the issue. He never apologized to Whitmore, neither privately nor publicly. 6 months later, he moved out of state and took a construction job. His wife later filed for divorce, citing the stress of his termination and his refusal to accept responsibility. Whitmore continued serving as a sergeant. 3 years after the incident, he was promoted to lieutenant. He is now a respected voice within the department on community relations and fair policing. The house on Maple Street remains his home. He still washes his car in the driveway on Saturday mornings. But now when patrol cars pass by, officers wave. They know who he is. They know what happened. And they understand that assumptions based on race carry consequences. The incident became a case study on how racial profiling operates even within systems that should know better. It showed that having policies against discrimination means little if those policies aren't enforced. It showed that complaints must be taken seriously and patterns must be recognized. Most of all, it showed that racial profiling harms more than the people targeted. It destroys trust in law enforcement, damages departmental reputations, and ends the careers of officers who let bias guide their decisions. Marcus Whitmore washing his car that Saturday morning was doing exactly what millions of people do every weekend. The only thing that made him appear suspicious was the color of his skin, and the officer who couldn't look past that lost everything. The lesson is simple but powerful. When you assume someone doesn't belong because of race, when you approach them with suspicion based only on appearance, when bias replaces facts, you are not practicing good policing. You are practicing discrimination. And eventually, whether the person being profiled is a sergeant, a lawyer, a teacher, or an ordinary citizen just trying to live their life, the truth surfaces. The pattern becomes clear. The consequences become real. Castellano believed he was investigating a suspicious person. What he was really doing was exposing his own bias. He believed his badge gave him the right to demand ID from anyone who looked out of place. What he learned was that looking out of place because of race is not reasonable suspicion. The body camera footage from that November morning is still used in training sessions nationwide, not only in police departments, but in discussions about implicit bias, racial profiling, and the importance of questioning our own assumptions. Every time someone watches that video, they see the exact moment an officer's career collapses. They see his face when he realizes the man he was profiling is his supervisor. They hear his excuses fall apart. They witness accountability in real time. If this story helped you understand how racial profiling works, even within law enforcement, please share it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that expose injustice and demand accountability. Leave a comment and tell me what stood out to you. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who need to see them. Thanks for watching until the end.